Hello and good evening, guys. This is Creating the Conversation podcast, and this is your host, Mr. Imran Mohammed, and of course, my main man. Oh, sorry, not that way. That way. That's the way it's supposed to be, isn't it, man? That way. That way. Mr. Ivan Humble, Big G. How are you, my man? How have you
Yeah,
been?
that's
It's been
right.
a long,
Yeah,
damn long
all
time. I
good,
want a
mate. All
conversation with you,
good.
brother. It's been. Look, I've been missing you, bro.
Yeah, I know we
Where's you
needed a
gone?
break, really. Do you know what I mean? We're going
We needed a break.
hammer and
Yeah, we
tong
definitely
for.
did.
Am I still here?
Of course
We
you
did
are.
need a break. We needed to recharge. Do you know what I mean? I think that's what we needed.
We did, mate. We did, and I think it was a good period. We had Ramadan, we had Eid. You understand? And there was a lot of soul searching. We came out of lockdown, all right, after COVID and all. Okay, COVID's still here. We're not saying it's not, but I've got to say, thank God the vaccination is doing its business. You know what I'm saying? I was worried about that. That even when the vaccination comes into place, people are still going to be like, I'm not getting that anymore. You know, that fear factor. But hopefully, it's doing its job. Hopefully, things will become more normal if there's any concept of normality. How have things at your end? Have things changed?
Yeah, it's pretty much back to normal down here. Do you know what I mean? Shops open, restaurants now opening. Yeah, it's all good down here. Do you know what I mean? We've been quite,
I love
actually,
it.
to
I
be
love it.
fair, we have been quite lucky with COVID around our area. Even though we're, even though the restrictions and that, we have been quite lucky with deaths and everything. So touch wood and thank our lucky stars for that.
Touch wood, mate. Touch wood. And may the Lord Almighty keep all you protected, all your family members, and all the people in the South. Big up, guys. And hopefully things will get much better. Ivan, my man, you're the Don, bro. The gentleman that we have on
And East.
today. Yeah, man. The gentleman we have on today on Creating the Conversation podcast. Guys, we are damn lucky. The young man accepted our invitation and is going to become another beautiful guest on this particular program, platform, and conversation and discussion. Guys, over time, those who are going to listen to us afterwards as well, please, when you listen to this, give your comments, give your thoughts, give your reflection. It's no one other than the young man, Mr. Travis Frain, that I'm going to bring up. Guys, his tenacity, his strength, his gutsiness. He's a northern lad. You know what I'm saying? Northern lad coming on to Creating the Conversation. Come on, Travis, my man. Big up. How are you, lad? You okay?
Yeah, not too bad. Thanks. Evening, Imran, Ivan. Good to be on.
Thank you very much, lad. What's with you sitting in the dark? What's going on?
I know, yeah. Honestly, what a night. I mean, I was just telling you before we started, but it seems just about everything that's gone wrong, has gone wrong. I mean, I sat down. I thought, got a decent setup here, nice backdrop. Switched the light on and the bloody bulb went. So we're doing it in the dark, guys. Okay.
Well, I'm all right with that because I can see the illuminous face, all right, of this young man through the darkness of the night, my brother. Welcome. Thank you very much. We are really grateful that you accepted to come and have a bit of a chat with us. Right.
Absolutely.
And a number of things, of course, we're going to talk and discuss about today. Hopefully our conversation with you is a genuine conversation,
Sure.
just to find out who you are, what you do, how you do it, and it works both ways. You can throw stuff at us whenever you want and discussion here and there. Of course, we've spoke. I want to start by talking to you about your early life, if you don't mind, young man.
Sure.
Because of course there are certain things we are aware of because there's a lot of information online around the atrocity that took place, of course, and you were right in the ongoings of it, exactly what happened. You were personally harmed and hurt through that particular process. But before we come to that, I want to know who you are. Who are you, my man? I know you're a northern lad.
Worth a
Share with me
start.
what you want to share with me. Go for it.
Sure.
Let's start from the start.
Well, I was born and bred in Lancashire, so as you say, northern lad. A small town near Blackburn, and what's to say? Really, pretty regular upbringing. Went to secondary school in the same town I grew up in, and then when I got to university age, I went off to Edge Hill in Ormskirk, also in Lancashire. So still on the home turf, and I wanted to study history with politics. That was my, for ages, for years and years, I wanted to be a teacher, a history teacher. And I had this side interest in politics as well. So I went to university to study history with politics. And really, as you hinted at, it was in my first year when I was there that the Westminster attack occurred, and we were actually caught up in it.
And it was, and definitely you were caught up in it. But being a northern lad, being a young man who's been, like you said, you're a normal lad, right? You're a normal person, you're a normal Englishman, right? And like I mentioned when we were speaking offline as well, that, there's a lot of respect and honor for someone like you. At a very tender age of 19, to go through a particular atrocity like that, and particular, experience, difficult experience like that. But then, of course, you went through a particular period which was difficult for you, right? But you came out of that and you started to do things which were more about, look, what I want to educate other people, tell people about my experience, and find the positive in this. Very
absolutely.
Briefly,
yeah.
Go, yeah.
No,
briefly,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
of course. So briefly, what we're going to talk about now is that, of course, still talking about you being a northern lad, being in the north, being a young man, Englishman. I want to know, what type of mindset did you have? Just one of the lads? Because you are from a particular part of this country. You are from a town near a place, close to a town, which is high Asian population, high Muslim population. Right? What type of experience did you have? What type of interaction did you have?
Well, I mean, growing up, as you mentioned, very, very working class area, and I went to state school and everything, and it was always, there's two minds about it. One is that obviously, primary school, we didn't have, because I live in this sort of small town Darwin that's, I guess, attached to the Blackburn area. Primary school and growing up, we didn't have any, BME classmates. And then to go to secondary school, however, it's very different. And so growing up, actually, we it wasn't really something that we were aware of. And I say that with take that with a pinch of salt, because I guess growing up, you do have that sense of naivety. But genuinely, there wasn't really that same sort of racial divide within secondary school education. So it set me up quite well, actually, for going to university, where obviously, you do have the wide range of people from all sorts of backgrounds. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, as you mentioned, I mean, these sort of issues are not something that I ever paid any attention to growing up. It's not something that I really was interested in. I guess it's just something you see on TV, and you I guess you just assume that it doesn't happen to you. And that's a big part of the work, as you hinted at, that I've been doing since then, in trying to make this just that little bit, I guess, a little bit more real. It's not a nice topic to ever talk about, but at the same time, I think it's important that people do know that this is something that can happen to regular folk, as you said. It's not something that just happens to people living in big cities, or it's not something that, say, for example, terrorism. It's not something that any one group, whether that be a nationality or a skin color. It's not one. No one has a monopoly on these sort of acts, and I think that's something that's really important for me to try and raise awareness of.
Ivan, Travis here, he is an archetype young man, British, white lad, being in this country, who's been exposed to a certain type of a very, horrific experience in his life. But there are many others who are from a similar background, similar ethnicity. They have a particular image and a view of the world, of course. Travis could have easily gone down a completely different route. What do you think made him not to?
Oh, that's a hard question, really. Do you know what I mean?
Sorry, mate.
I don't know, because when people get mixed up in that, You've kind of stumped me because there's no one size fits all. Everybody's different in there. Do you know what I mean? We can't lump people together. So I think maybe Travis was just that bit more resilient than most people. His upbringing wasn't as hard as some others. Because when you get things hard is when you blame others. Easy, if that makes sense. But you've got to be stumped on that question. I'm gonna have to think.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I put it like that, but my intention was.
It's life choices. It depends what on that individual's choice. Do you know what I mean?
I'm going to jump in if that's all right with you. I mean, so for me, this was something that, in particular, my sort of thinking that took place after the attack, and obviously, I went through a long process of trying to think through these issues. It was something that, for me, I guess the best way to put it would be that after the attack happened, and obviously the perpetrator, he died in the attack. People have often said to me, well, what would you do if the guy was in front of you? And I've always thought it's a very bizarre question because no real amount of energy from me has ever been put towards that man, because he, even purely if we talk from a statistical point of view, he doesn't fit the standard sort of subset that we're used to. The guy who carried out the attack was in his mid-50s, for Christ's sake. About the only thing he had that sort of fit the profile that people often see as a terrorist is that he was a convert. He wasn't some impressionable young man, in his early 20s or his late teens. And so for me, I didn't see him as a sort of representation of any wider group. And I think because I had that disconnect, I was able to channel my anger elsewhere. And I should say, part of that for me as well, I went through a long process of sort of being at odds with myself, because so often after these attacks, all we hear is, we need love, not hate, and we stand united and all this sort of thing, which is all fair and well, and I completely agree with it. But having just survived this, I wanted to hate, and to be quite honest, that was a natural reaction to hate. I wanted to hate someone. I'm not saying that had to be, any group, for example, because it wasn't. But if I wanted to hate the guy who carried out the attack, or if I wanted to hate, the way it was responded to, if that was an issue, or, I'm just talking from experience from speaking to other people affected by different attacks, then that for me should have been embraced as a natural reaction. And I think there has to be a healthy outlet for that. And too often I was sort of at odds with myself, because I was sort of felt like I was being told, you can't hate, you're not supposed to do that. And that sort of, for me, was where the rational thinking was trying to sort of kick in, if you will.
Travis, what you just said there is a very, very crucial point. That's what I'm trying to get to. Because rationality or logic clearly stipulates there is a reaction, and usually it's not a positive reaction, there is a negative reaction, right? On the 22nd of March 2017, there's a number of people that died. Okay, their lives were taken. These were innocent human beings. I'm going to put the image up. These are the individuals, people who died, people whose lives were taken, whose families were impacted. Even today, year in, year out, if not day in, day out, they go through the same trauma of the loss of these beautiful human beings, these beautiful individuals who are part of their amazing worlds and amazing lives. But suddenly, this individual comes into their life for whatever anger reason, frustration reason, whatever the reason was. He was in a car, he mowed down individuals, and you are one of them. He did that. People, they were pushed off the bridge. People he had a knife, he was ready, he had stabbed people. He had done a very horrific act altogether of terrorism. Now, like you said, people were saying, mercy, love. Your reaction was the correct reaction. 1 minute, I'm angry. So what did you do with your anger?
Well, for me, it was, for me, a big part of that process, as you've mentioned, was accepting the anger and accepting that there is a way to use the energy that anger provides you with. I spent a long time channeling that anger towards myself, thinking I was to blame, thinking, I guess with the sort of survivor's guilt. And for years, I sort of punished myself. I sort of sat at home, drinking beer and eating pizza and plowed on about 20, 30 pounds. And I guess it was, over the sort of years, it was a process for me because I had to use, in my case, for example, a lot of the anger actually turned towards the government and towards certain agencies, which, in my opinion, should have provided better support for those of us after the attack. And we discussed it in the pre-show chat, but as far as I'm concerned, these attacks are not carried out on us as individuals; they're carried out on us as representative of the state, whether we like it or not. And so it should be the state that provides that support to people affected. And for me, really, the longest part of the experience was the sort of months and years, quite frankly, that followed, where we didn't receive the adequate support that we required. And it's that where my anger stemmed from. So for me, it was about trying to use that anger in a way that could hopefully change things for people in future. Because sadly, these attacks aren't going to stop and they're not going to go away anytime soon. So I think the best thing that I can do as someone who has been affected is try and use my experience to try and improve things for people who sadly will be affected in future.
And the thing is, Ravish, you as an individual who was right in the middle of this, and of course, you were hurt very severely.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You went through a very, very traumatic experience. I have no words, right, of any words that I could say to you to have even any sense of expression of how much respect I have for you. I have no words. I can't express it. I said to you earlier as well that, I have a lot of honor, a lot of respect, a lot of love for individuals who go through something like this and have the tenacity and have this bravery to say, "Yeah, bring it on." And you're one of them guys, and God give you strength for that.
Thank you.
But naturally, young man, it's not only you who went through this, it was also your loved ones. What was the ripple effect on your family?
Oh, I mean, it totally ripples throughout, never mind family and friends, but a community, especially when you live in a small town like I do. And, this is something that just isn't something that affects people from around here. It's not something that people pay attention to. And then, God, the local neighbours, the local papers, practically, attached themselves to me for like bloody months, and I couldn't shake them because it was the most sort of fascinating thing that had ever happened in the local area. So I think it really, for me anyway, big sort of, I guess, realization was that it just makes it real for people. It makes it, even for those who only know you by passing acquaintance, as soon as they realize that you were affected by this, they go, oh, wow, I didn't know anyone I knew was affected, and it becomes real for them, and it brings these issues home. And I think that when we talk about a terror attack in the very literal sense of terror, that's the thing that I really worry that we have to be worried about, because, yes, there's the initial incident and there's that initial fear, I think, that follows, and the potential backlash against communities within the first sort of week or two. But what is the longer term psychological effects that as a society we're enduring by accepting these things as normal? And that's not a conscious acceptance. It's not something that we wake up and say it's normal for terror attacks to happen. But I think because we're not having those public conversations to the extent that we need to, it is something that we're genuinely just, for the majority of people, accepting and just in the hopes that it won't happen to us. And that, for me, has a profound, I guess, psychological effect in the longer term. And I worry what those effects, as you mentioned, within communities across the country are going to be.
I think this with us at the moment, sadly, is called something around like a pigeon syndrome. What that is when a pigeon sees a cat, it closes its eyes. And it thinks it's not going to get pounced on. And majority of the people in this country are probably in that position. We
Mm.
close our eyes, we think it won't be me. It can't get me. But let me say something, and I think is something very close to my heart.
Mhm.
When the MEN arena attack took place, so I don't work very far from there.
Mhm.
In fact, I used to literally walk in and out of that, foyer.
Yeah.
And when that attack took place, and when I looked at them faces, Travis and Ivan, it shook me. I'm a person who's lived on this earth for a while now, and I'm exposed to a lot of different type of traumas and different type of experiences of people. But suddenly, when it happened in that city, it came home. It hit me. These were young, innocent, fun-loving lives whose lives were taken in a moment. In a moment, they went for fun. In a moment, innocent, getting on with their life, having a bit of a laugh, no problem. Yeah. But I took that personally. I really did.
Mhm.
Even now, we tend to go through Victoria and stuff like station, and
Yeah.
of course, the memorial was recently, and
Mhm.
it's fascinating. And I believe that this is exactly how it should be. Even in the case when you went through what you went through, even till today, um, on that date, I know people get together, they bring balloons, they put pictures
Mhm.
there, they put flowers. It's a memorial thing, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
it's a really, 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 really powerful experience. But what I'm
Yeah.
saying is, if we don't make it personal, we won't deal with it. It's
No.
nobody else's problem. It is our problem. Even though
Yeah.
I'm not,
Yeah. Exactly.
I'm from a
And
particular, yeah, I'm from a particular community, and sadly, my community has been the focal point, right, of a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, and a lot of finger pointing. Sadly, it's been really difficult in that sense. But
mhm.
like you said, young man, is that I get it. It did come home, right? But we can't just not make it personal. We have to think about it and reflect over it and just not close our eyes and deal with it. And I agree with you. But
I
that's the
do,
issue. Go
and I
for it.
think Manchester in particular really, I think, in many ways affected me just as much as the Westminster attack actually did, because with Westminster, I was able to create this separation in my mind that this had happened in London, and I'd only ever been to London maybe once or twice before in my entire life before the attack happened, and it was a far away place. Psychologically, I could make that separation. And the number one thing that people were saying to me in those sort of, I think it was 2 months between the two attacks happening, was, oh well, what are the chances of that happening? That'll never happen again. You're lucky in everything, and then Manchester being right on my doorstep, you know, and it really struck me. I mean, I guess that sort of 9/11 moment. I remember where I was when I first saw the news reports coming in about Manchester, and just knowing, I think as well, even that early on, only 2 months after the attack, just knowing what they would have to go through in terms of the sort of months and years following, and the struggles to get the correct support that they require, and really just this sort of again the internal processing that you do.
Again,
I mean, as you've mentioned, the communities that are affected, it's too easy, I think, in particular, and I think even more so for people who haven't been affected by these sort of incidents firsthand, it's too easy to blame an entire group, because that is the easy option. It is easier to just say, well, they're bad, we're good. It's the thing you watch in films, the good guys versus the bad guys. Life isn't that simple. It's not black and white. We live in a very grey world, and I don't want to sound depressing, but there are some bad people out there,
of course not.
but not an entire group. And an entire group, by very nature of us all being unique and individual people, cannot be, classed with the same bracket and put in the same bracket as one another. And I think it's just about accepting that, really. And I think, with being involved in these attacks, you do see the worst in humanity, but you also see the best. And it took me a long time, I think, to focus on that aspect rather than the bad aspect. And there are still times when, you know, every day, not a day goes by when I don't think about what happened.
What was the turning point?
I think for me, so a big part of my recovery actually, so one of the issues we had after the attack actually was a lack of commemoration. There was a lot of commemoration for the attack within the grounds of the Houses of Parliament. MPs and officials and politicians were very keen to commemorate Keith and to commemorate what they called an attack on Parliament. But at the same time, they then just assumed that someone else would be arranging something for the rest of us. And that wasn't the case. And what actually happened as a result was that the attack actually went without commemoration for about 4 years.
Wow.
And it was only this anniversary that we managed to get our first ever commemoration.
Oh, wow.
And that, you know, and every year it was so frustrating because every year all the journalists and everything would report there's been a commemoration for the Westminster attack. I remember the first anniversary, I actually went down there and I'd actually contacted my local MP and he'd said, oh, I can get you into the service if you want. You know, I'll get you in on my sort of visitor's badge. And I felt like almost like an imposter at a service that was meant to be commemorating us. And I remember I was on the bridge at the time of the anniversary on the first year after the attack. And there was a group of about 20 people, all of us affected, that just sort of gathered impromptu. And none of us had any contact details with each other, obviously, because we'd never had that chance to meet. And I remember there was just this really bizarre feeling that, you know, only 10 metres away, within the gates of Parliament, a service is happening to commemorate the attack you were involved in, but you're not allowed to attend it. And for years, that was something, and that was something that for years I really struggled with. And in particular, I think I struggled with that inability to meet other people affected. I mean, I was very lucky that, you know, I was in a group from my university when the attack happened, so we had each other. But not being able to meet, you know, the other people who were on the bridge who, you know, through an event that lasted, 30 seconds, a minute, you now share a bond for life, whether you like it or not.
True.
And the inability to meet those people and to have that peer-to-peer support, I think was a really, really big obstacle for me. I was very lucky, I guess, that, you know, with the Manchester attack happening and with the many other attacks that sadly happened that year, I actually began to know many, many other people from other attacks before I got to know people from Westminster. But I think the turning point for me came when I actually managed to start getting that contact with other people affected by the attack, and in particular some of the bereaved families. And really just, you know, that's when the survivor's guilt, you know, sort of showed itself to be as ridiculous as it is. Because the best thing we can do, really, and I really do believe this, and it's something that, as I've mentioned, it took a good 4 years to get to that point, but the best thing we can do is do our best to enjoy the rest of our lives and do our best to make sure we remember those people, because would they have wanted that, you know? And then that for me was the turning point.
What is the survivor's guilt?
So for me, a big part of it was, so when the attack actually happened, I was on the bridge with the other lads, and where we were stood, we'd got about a third of the way along the bridge, you see, and I was on the side closest to the pavement, and you know, I was on my phone at the time. Actually, I'd just put a picture of Big Ben on Snapchat as we walked past it, so I was talking to someone about that, and it, you know, literally a split second, when one of the other lads shouted something along the lines of "Look out!" or, you know, "Travis, look." Obviously looked up, and those sort of, you know, a split second, because the guy was driving his 4x4, you know, SUV, whatever you want to call it. And he'd mounted the pavement and he was coming straight towards us. And, you know, when he hit us, I mean, the other lads were all hit with glancing blows. We were all hit by the car. One of the lads, for example, was hit by the bumper that came off in midair. One of them was hit by the wing mirror. I ended up going straight over the bonnet, you know, over the window and into the air, actually, before I landed back down the concrete. But I think for me, there were two aspects, really, that I'd probably only say for the first year or two afterwards I suffered with the guilt, but the guilt came from two aspects. And one was the fact that I wasn't able to do that much in the aftermath. So one of the injuries I'd received, I mean, I've done first aid training and stuff in the past, and I'd like to think I did what I could, but my left hand was shattered. Every single finger on my left hand except the thumb was broken, and it was twisted in all sorts of horrible directions. And I broke the hand as well, and so by very nature of it, there wasn't much I could do due to the injuries I'd received. And whilst I wasn't actually aware of the injuries I'd received to my leg, I got up and started walking around and everything in a bit of a daze afterwards.
Typical northern lad. Don't see his all broken up.
Well, I remember, it's one of those where it's a very bizarre situation, and I think, as I had my phone in my hand at the time, and I remember two things were my priority in that immediate aftermath. And after I got hit by the car, and I was very lucky because every part of my body on the left side that hit the concrete was fractured, but my head landed on the stomach of one of the other lads in my group who'd already been knocked to the ground, and so it was cushioned. And I remember getting up, and he said something along the lines of, "Oh, you're covered in blood," and I knew straight away it wasn't my blood, and it was actually his blood. But I got up, and I remember the two things that I guess you sort of go into autopilot, but I needed to find my phone because it had flown out of my hand, and my shoes had flown off. Don't ask me how, but having hit by the car, my shoes had flown off. And I remember, I walked the full length of the bridge in a bit of a daze, really, and collected my items, and obviously saw the range of injuries that happened. But I guess to go back to when you mentioned about the guilt, for me, our placement on the bridge meant that it was literally a matter of centimeters whether we lived or died. And the lady in front of us, she sadly died. She was knocked under a bus, and then the lady behind us was knocked into the Thames. And being directly between those two women, then seeing their life stories plastered all over the media and everything, it took a big toll on me, I think. And even now, when a lot of the work I do involves interviewing other people affected by terrorism and trying to share their story. And even now, it never gets easier. It never gets easier with every story you hear. And it does take a toll. But, part of me says it has to be worthwhile. Part of me says that at the end of the day, if we're sharing these stories, it's got to be better out than in. It's got to be better out telling people about this and telling people about these issues. And that's really what sort of spurs me on and makes me think that it's worthwhile, really.
It is worthwhile, and there's no doubt about that. I know my man Ivan, he could share that with you. There's a lot of, he's had his own journey. And I think, Ivan, isn't it true that when you share your story, the impact that it has on others, but of course, ultimately the impact it has on you is really powerful?
Yeah, you do kind of get emotionally strong to it, I guess, when you're constantly repeating it. Do you know what I mean? My journey's not as traumatic as Travis's, do you know what I mean? But I can imagine it does open old wounds when you talk about things. You say about guilt, Travis. I suffered from a bit of guilt the other day about my journey. Nothing like your guilt, but similar sort of thing. I could have prevented my daughter moving on with her life because of my past, do you know what I mean? And that kind of guilt, I kind of understand it. And one of my best friends, actually, is Dan Bedell, the most injured from 7/7. So, do you know Dan?
I think I lost you there for a second. Sorry, can you repeat that?
You said, do you know Dan Bedell?
I was just saying, one of my best mates is Dan.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I've not met him. The name rings a bell, though. Was he injured in 7/7? Wasn't he one of the most injured?
That's right.
The most injured one, yeah. He's my mate, do you know what I mean? So
yeah,
I've heard his story. Like the X-rated no holds barred version, do you know what I mean? And
yeah, of course. Yeah.
The one thing that his story taught me, it made me feel guilty again about, not because when I was in the EDL, I used to use the 7/7 bomb attacks for my own agenda against the Muslim community. So back then, I never considered the family or anything until I met Dan. And man, he nearly broke me down in tears. Because like you said, 20 years on, he still will be life. So for him, that journey of, I don't think people hear that side enough. You know what I mean? That most people that you know as well that you spoke to, the attack could have been years ago, but they're still rebuilding their life in one way or another.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I actually spoke to a guy the other day, and I'm sure he won't mind me paraphrasing this, but he was affected by an attack during the Troubles in the 1970s. And he was similar age to myself at the time. I think he was 21, 22. And after the attack happened, he was really severely injured. And I think he lost 4 of his mates, if I remember right, in the attack. And after the attack happened, he just sort of tried to get on with his life, and he became a mega workaholic and tried to keep himself busy with work. And he's now in his I think 70s, if I remember right. And he, said something when I was interviewing him that really sort of struck me. And he said, "You don't have to die to lose your life." And I know that sounds dramatic, but to hear that from a guy in his 70s, who'd been affected at a similar age to myself, really sort of struck me. And I think, it's about what he wanted to focus on really was the fact that, it didn't do any favors for him pretending for years that the attack hadn't happened and trying to get on with life, because it's always there at the back of his mind. And that's why for me, I try in many ways to find a positive outlet for it, to find, as hard as that is, to find some sort of good to come out of something so awful, really. And I think, it took me a long time to realize that you can't escape what's happened to you. It's your life now. And I think one of the biggest parts of people affected by terrorism, I certainly believe from my experiences speaking to other people affected anyway, is the lack of agency, the lack of control, the fact that in that moment, you are no longer, your life, your destiny, if you will, is no longer in your hands. And I think that's something that a lot of people really struggle with afterwards. And that for me is part of the reason why, as you mentioned, I do these talks in schools and things like that, because it's my way of using what's happened and taking back control, if you will.
See, the thing is, because you spoke about it on the basis of having control and losing control, in a society where we are taught that you have all the control, and when a traumatic incident of this kind takes place, it instabilizes us and destabilizes us. And that's why, if for some of the work I do, I work with people who take other people's lives. They destroy people's lives. Do you understand? But the thing is, even though they do that, there is a traumatic experience that they've gone through. So many of them get diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah.
They are impacted by certain type of physical, mental disorders in sense of anxiety, depression. They fall into a state of mind and state of heart which is really difficult for them to snap out of. And like you said, there has to be a way of them revisiting certain horrific situations, circumstances, and then dealing with that, right, systematically, correctly. See, you chose a completely different path. You said, pills and stuff like that are not for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not doing that. Which is a very powerful way of dealing with this, because there are people who do that. Why did you?
Yeah,
Why did
and
you
more power to them as well.
Yeah.
Whatever works for the
Yeah.
individual, I think.
Yeah. But why didn't you go down that route?
So for me, one of the biggest things immediately after the attack, I mean, obviously beyond the physical injuries I'd received, I spent 8 days in hospital after the attack. As I sort of mentioned before, as well as the injuries to the hand, I had a fracture in the left leg, as well as a torn ligament, and I had quite a deep shrapnel wound as well at the top of the left leg, which I was very lucky just, missed the artery.
Wow.
And so, my immediate aftermath of the attack, if you will, particularly within the first month, was completely dominated by the physical aspects and what was, for lack of a better phrase, a dehumanizing state. Being stuck in a hospital bed, being carried to a toilet, carried to a washroom and stuff. It's no state to be in at 19 years old, and that was something that took me a lot. I mean, I consider myself quite a proud person, and it was something that took me a long time to recover from. So a lot of my, I guess, energy was dedicated towards that physical aspect in the first month. And it was sort of beyond that when, I got back to Lancashire, and there was this real drop-off in support, I think, and in recognition of what had happened. I mean, when I was in hospital, we were being visited every day by police and obviously doctors and nurses and all sorts. And then as soon as I was discharged, we were just told, get booked in with your local GP and they'll coordinate things. Now, obviously,
simply just get on with it.
Pretty much. And I mean, I don't need to spell it out, but you can't just get a GP appointment like that. So it was already quite a few weeks before I managed to get into the GP, tell him what's happened, ask him to coordinate the support. By the time I'd had the stitches taken out and everything, I was practically on the deadline. For a few of them, I was actually over the deadline, and it caused further scarring. But when it came to, as you mentioned, the psychological side of things, I didn't feel like I needed to be given a label or to be given, pills after pills. I just wanted to speak to someone about what had happened. In the same way that when I was in hospital, the police were coming every day. They were taking your witness statement to see if any details had changed, if you'd remembered anything new. I wanted to tell someone what had happened, and not have to feel like I was censoring it. Because obviously when you speak to family, friends, hell, even media, you do leave things out because you don't want it to affect them in the same way that it's affected you. And I just wanted to speak to someone who, in their own way was trained to deal with this sort of thing and who, I guess, wouldn't have been, sort of secondhand affected by this. And that just wasn't available. I was told that the only way to get that was to go on a waiting list for a sort of psychiatry assessment. Yeah, go for it.
Second. That's very, very, very troubling for me. I work, like I said, my work is based upon caring for people. That's my job, right? When a young man like yourself who's been through this very horrific experience in hospital for 8 days, in the circumstance that he's in, and he's been told that there is no real support for you, or you make your own way. One of the biggest issues that have come out of this investigation that's taken place with the MEN, right, is the lack of support, lack of help for the victim, the families, and the larger community. We claim as a society, right, we care for the people, we care for our people who've lost their lives, and we care for those who've been impacted by the loss of family members and friends and loved ones. But you know what it is, when it comes down to doing of the making sure the work gets done, it doesn't happen. And that hurt.
And you're correct. And I think that for me, as I mentioned earlier, that was where a lot of my anger stemmed from, or shall I say, it was where it was directed, because I'd always considered myself quite a political person. I'd always been really aware and interested in these sort of things. And it just made me completely disillusioned. And it made me really sort of question all the sort of beliefs I held, the core things that, I felt about us as a country, and about the world, really. And I think, as you mentioned, it sort of shone a light on the fact that for regular folk and for those of us who haven't been affected by one of these sort of attacks, we do see things on the news and we see the government say things, and quite often, naturally, we accept it as true. But there's too much talk and too little action when it comes to these sort of issues. And, I mean, we're at the moment, so some of the work we're doing at the moment is actually in producing a comparative report between the UK and other countries around the world. It's fascinating, when you look at places like France, where I remember a few years ago I did a joint interview, and it was with one of the victims of the London Bridge attack, and she had French citizenship. She'd lived in the UK for quite a while, but she had French citizenship. And within hours of the attack happening, The French state had wired interim funds to her account for any immediate costs that might have been incurred.
Wow.
Within, I think it was something like a week of the attack happening, the French Home Secretary flew out to London to go and meet with her and check everything. Yeah, I mean, we're not asking for that, right? We don't need that. But at the same time, the level of support, and if I remember right, they actually flew 2 trained psychologists out to London for her and said, look, they're going to stay as long as you need. And then the French,
that's the state working for its people.
And it's the same, so this is the problem. So it's obviously, not everywhere around the world has this correct. There are other countries that I won't necessarily name that do have it worse than us, and that's understandable. But we are, what are we, like 4th richest country in the world? We're up in the top 10. Oh, that's all I know. We can afford to do this. And when we talk about, global Britain, when we talk about resilience, as Ivan mentioned earlier, these are all things we should be taking into account, because the sad reality is that these issues can affect any of us. I as I mentioned, I'm from a small town. I'm down in London for 3 days. Statistically, this shouldn't have affected me, but it did. And absolutely. And it affected, people from around the world in the Westminster attack. We had Americans, Romanians, French, people from as far as South Korea who were affected. And so this is something that can affect any of us. And I think it's something that when we talk about support for victims, it's not just a niche. It's not just something that will only be supporting a few individual people. It's something that if we can support the people who are affected by these attacks, we can quite literally reduce that, as you mentioned, that terror that are caused by these attacks.
I was one of the speakers at a particular panel in Brussels a few years ago. And what they were trying to do was they're trying to understand the impact of terrorist attacks on families and, of course, the larger community. And what they were thinking of doing from a European context was to provide funds, support, help. And they wanted some clarity in how it impacts communities. So I came from a particular organization. Of course, I work in Muslim communities, and in mosques and etc. We had another individual who, of course, was part of. Is the husband of our Jo Cox, the young lady who lost her life because of the horrific attack on her. There's another young lady who was part of an organization who works with women who are impacted and affected by terrorist attacks, or who are the family members of those who have lost their lives through terror attacks. And it was one of the things for me was that I especially went down and we sat there, we spoke about this, and I felt, 1 minute, at least they're talking about it. They're ready to support people. They're ready to give them a lifeline if that's possible. Of course, you can't bring that human being back, but the aftermath, like you said, to send psychologists all the way from, France or whatever, and for them to come to help that young lady is like, that's exactly what you need. And
so this is, this is something that, goes to the heart of what I've been trying to focus on over the past few years, really, because, as we, going back to what we mentioned at the start, what are the long-term effects of this? Terrorism, as we know it in the 21st century. I mean, obviously, we've had years of IRA incidents and things like that in the years below. But the last 20 years is relatively, in terms of, I'm a history student, as I mentioned at the start. In terms of history, that's relatively short-term. So what are the effects that this is going to have? Are we, in many ways, are we going to have a sense of a blitz mentality that we had after World War II? What is the effect that this is having on wider society, even those that aren't directly injured? And, as you mentioned, at least in Europe, they're talking about these issues. Number one in the UK right now is getting the government and getting society in the UK to talk about these issues, because you can't fix a problem if you don't accept there is one in the first place.
Aye. The first step of rehabilitation.
Yeah.
You have to agree, I got a problem.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Guys, you're listening to Created the Conversation podcast. Of course, this is our guest, Mr. Travis Frain. You can find my young man, this young man, Mr. Travis Frain, on @TravisFrain on Twitter. Come on, guys, you're going to join him. Of course, when you're going to listen to this later on as well. And we need to get them numbers up. Come on, follow this young man. He needs to. No, I really mean that, because someone was very inspirational like you, who speaks in the particular way that you do. You have a particular way of reflection and thought, and I think it's important that people follow you, learn, understand, especially the model of the world that you're projecting is weird. Amazingly, it's very positive. Listen, let's get together and let's do something together, guys. Creating the Conversation podcast. We've just been talking about, of course, this young man's, Mr. Travis Frain's early life, his experience because after the 22nd of March 2017 atrocities in Westminster, and so with immense bravery and so much courage, he explained and he's talking to us about his own personal experience of what had happened. Travis, I want to bring your thoughts and reflection to what happened regarding the media after that, because that was one of the biggest experiences in your life. Like you said, you are from a small town in the north, not north of England. Normal lad, living his life, doing his thing, uni student, getting on with life, right? Politics and history, that's what you were studying. Suddenly, you are projected into the stratosphere, right? Because of this horrific attack. Of course, like you shared, the experience itself was horrific enough. Tell me explain to me and explain to Ivan and explain to our listeners, hopefully, what happened with you and your relationship with the media at large.
Sure. Well, I mean, it was a massive eye-opener for me, to be quite honest. I mean, immediately after the attack happened, actually, even when we talk about media, I guess today that also incorporates social media. And I remember being led there on the concrete, covered in blood and everything. And I remember a bus going past, and pretty much every window, people had their phones up, filming it. And I just remember how bizarre that situation was. Don't get me wrong, there were tens and tens of people who did run over to help us and ran, directly in the line of fire, if you will. But just that sort of bizarre interpretation of having all these people have their phones, out the bus window. I remember just being struck aback by it. And I think the first instance of what I would say unethical media experience for me was almost immediately after the attack. I was being loaded onto a stretcher at the end of the bridge where they were keeping both ambulances. There was a suspicious package in the middle of the bridge as well. So a couple of the EMTs and stuff were wearing like bomb vests and stuff, and it was quite, as you can imagine, quite scary. And so we were wheeled to the end of the bridge where the ambulances were waiting. And obviously I wasn't aware of this at the time, but I was loaded onto the ambulance, and whilst I was being loaded on, there were journalists taking pictures of us, which I guess, it's just a free society, it's all fair and well. But what happened after that actually was one journalist took that photograph and actually sent it to my mum within a few hours of the attack happening.
My Lord.
And said, "Is this your son? Can you confirm whether he's dead or alive?"
Wow.
And I'm on a stretcher covered in blood here.
So
I was very
insensitive.
lucky, and I was very lucky
my
that
Lord.
my first instinct, I'd mentioned that I walked the length of the bridge to pick up my phone and everything. The first person I called was one of the guys who was in the group still in Parliament to try and warn them that this was coming their way. But after I'd rang them, I actually rang my mother and let her know what had happened and just said, look, something crazy has happened, but I'm okay. Again, obviously, I wasn't aware of the range of injuries I'd received at that time. But I just had that instinct that I had to let her know. And thank God that I did, because if I hadn't, this would have been the way she found out. Right off the bat, they found my mum's place of work, and they were all outside. They also found my home address. To this day, I still don't know how. To be quite honest, I don't even know how they found my name, because some of the other lads who were in my group affected by the attack have very fortunately been able to remain anonymous. But for whatever reason, they found my name within a few hours of the attack happening. They identified me, and that was that, really. They were outside my house for about a week after the attack, all the news vans and everything, ringing the doorbell constantly. We're talking about a house where my little sister, who would have been 6 or 7 at the time, is running around and everything. It's not something that you want them to experience.
Exactly.
And to this day, I can only think, thank God they didn't find where she was going to school, because I wouldn't have put it past them to be outside there as well. And while I was in hospital, there was this real sense of vulnerability. Obviously, once they treated me and patched me up, and I had 2 operations as well. One on the hand, and one on the knee. Go on.
Just hold that thought right there.
Sure.
So I've never had an opportunity to speak to someone and ever ask them exactly this experience that you just had. I had never known that it was that horrific, insensitive, no feeling, trying to chase a story, trying to get interviews, maybe just to get in front of the news, the front page of the news. Where does the human being go? Where does the human feeling go out of the bloody window?
And that's the core of it, because so many people I tell this to, and they say, yeah, exactly, and so many people I tell this to, and they say, oh, there's supposed to be rules against that. They don't, as you've mentioned, Ivan. It's not something that, it's not something to tar all of them with the same brush, but for those that are engaging in these acts, they don't care that there's rules against it, because they know that for the most part, because these attacks affect people who will not have any media experience, will not know how PR works, how press works, how you can, stop them from doing this sort of thing. They know that they'll get away with it. How many people, if you ask the regular Joe on the street, would know how to make a press complaint to IPSO? It's just not something you know. Especially if you never expect to be involved in a high-profile incident like this. So I think there is a part of me that does really think that they take advantage of that. Now, what I was going to say, actually, Imran, about when I was in hospital, it was... I always remember my phone for the first week or so after the attack. I couldn't take my phone off charge because I was receiving that many messages from journalists that it would die. I received thousands over Facebook, email, Twitter, you name it. And again, to this day, I don't know how they got hold of these. I can only assume good Google search and they came across it. But, email and phone number in particular is a little bit worrying when you think about it. And to the point where I was having them, they were dropping me messages and saying, oh, I'm outside your hospital. Let me know if you want me to bring you a brew and we'll have a brief chat, and trying to be all sort of buddy with you and everything. And, we had police officers on the door to the ward. There were 3 other people in the ward who were affected by the attack. Police officers to the door, key card access only. That was how ridiculous it got. And I think, I guess part of what came from that, we were discussing it in the pre-show chat, but part of what came from that was actually a lot of abuse, because we started getting people, sending us these messages, death threats and stuff, who claimed the attack was fake, who claimed it was a false flag. They claimed we were actors, or they quite simply claimed we were milking it, when the irony is I hadn't given a single interview, but because these people grabbed all the information and pictures they needed off my social media, they made an article from it if you didn't give them a comment.
They did as they pleased.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I was having, torrents of death threats flying in as well. And so it was a very, very, scary time, really. And something that, particularly, as I mentioned, when you're completely, incapacitated, you do get very worried. And these people were being pretty specific with details of where I lived. And understandably so, given that the media had found my address like that. So it sort of made these issues very real and made it very possible that they could, attempt these sort of incidents. I never had any knowledge of these sort of false flag conspiracies or anything. Obviously, I'd heard people, conspiracy theorists casting doubt on 9/11 and things like that, but I never knew how widespread it was. And these were coming from all sorts of sectors. We had, Islamist type groups that'd be sending them in, and they'd be saying, this attack was carried out to cast doubt on the Muslim population, and you're a paid actor and you've been paid to cause hate against this community. And then we'd have, the sort of more unclear or potentially sort of far right aspects where there'd be people saying this attack's been carried out to justify another war in the Middle East that's going to cost white lives, and really bizarre stuff that I never had any insight into. And all of a sudden, by no meaning of my own, I was flung into it. And I think when we talk about the guilt before, that definitely played a part in it, because I felt, almost like shouted into silence, if you will, because there were so many voices coming from every direction at once. Everyone had an opinion. And as you mentioned earlier, it's not often that we actually hear from those directly affected. And that for me is a big part of the recovery, really, being able to tell your own story.
And talking about your story, what a guy you are. What you're doing now is phenomenal, even through that barrage of negativity and being flung around all of the place, and your exposure of your family, your residence, your home. Like you said, you went through a journey of guilt, you went through a journey of anger, frustration around this issue. But what you've done with that, Travis, is amazing. It's like you walking into schools, you walking into working with young people, you walking and giving your story and people hearing your story from you is amazingly powerful, my man. Where the hell did you get that energy, man?
Honestly, I don't know. And there are days where you feel sort of, like you could speak in every school across the country, and there are other days where you just want to sort of pretend that it never happened. And I think accepting that was part of what allowed me to do these sort of visits, because they're never easy. And as I mentioned earlier, the more you hear other people's stories, it never gets easier hearing these things. And I think it's just something that I've had to build myself, really. And I think, actually, without sort of jumping the gun a bit, but I think it's something I've been forced to develop because of the fact that those support services really weren't there. We weren't sort of looked after and I guess sort of provided with the support that we should have had. Yes. And that's not something that, that I would ever see as a positive. But I think if I had to take a positive from that, it's probably that it has built me into a more resilient person, whether I've liked it or not. And it's just about trying to find a positive outlet for that, really.
And you found it. And I think one of the most powerful ways, and I know Ivan Mamania, he says it himself when he tells the story, when he listens to young people speaking back to him and telling him directly that they are amazed that he can go through so much hate and then come out on the other side and be a man of immense love. Ivan, share with us and share with my brother Travis here of some of the experiences that you've had in when you tell your story, how it helps you to deal with your own trauma.
I don't know if it helps at all, but it does I think me giving back is my way of forgiveness. Me telling my story, I think my passion is, everybody talks about ideology, but they never talk about what fuels it, what drives it. That's what I'm all about. I want to have that conversation that nobody's having. A bit like you, Travis, with your world. There's lots of things that we're not talking about that we need to talk about. But then even when we do start talking, we're not listening to each other, are we? Do you know what I mean? And I think that's that thing that listening is what we're lacking now. The chatting's good. It's the listening and realising that you can hear things that go against your moral compass. Do you know what I mean? But you've got to acknowledge that other point of view's there or that other problem's there.
Thank you, Ivan. You know, Travis, I want you to tell us, and I want you to tell us on this particular platform of creating the conversation. When you talk to young people, when you are sharing your story, what are you feeling? What are you thinking? And what is the reaction that you get?
Yeah, well, I mean, where to begin? You know, it's never. I know I've already said this, you know, countless times, but it never really gets any easier telling my story, and I think, you know, naturally you include or exclude things based on the sort of age range and, you know, the audience you're speaking to, but I think it has to, you know, it has to be worthwhile. I mean, the feedback I've had from the groups I've spoken to so far has been positive across the board, and I know that's easy to say, but you know, I hope it genuinely does have an impact on these people, because I think sometimes, as difficult as it is for people like myself and probably Ivan will be able to sympathise with this, people who have lived experience of these issues, we have to include the nitty gritty. You know, we have to include the real sort of down and dirty details of it, because if we don't, if we try and sugarcoat it, it just becomes, again, that interpretation that it's just something we see on the TV, that it's just something that is in a TV program or something. And I think we really do have to get into the nitty gritty of it, as hard as it is for us, because it's the only way that we can break through that barrier and actually reach into people and sort of shake them into, you know, into thinking about these issues. I don't know if there's anything you want to jump in with there, Ivan, but that's certainly been my interpretation.
Now, I think it's spot on, Travis. Do you know what I mean? That nitty gritty is a bit that people need to hear. And I'm all up for that kind of conversation. When you talk about reactions to things, I'm not kidding. When you tell a story, it doesn't get any easier. I still get quite emotional sometimes, 4 or 5 years on doing this, when I talk about my family side of things. That's still really quite hard for me to speak about. But that, out of all the other stuff I run on about, that is the most important part. And that's the part that gets me emotional feedback. Like, you get lots of great feedback. I've had people in tears, do you know what I mean? Because of the way I tell it, how honest I am. And I think that's the thing. You can't lie about anything, especially your journey. You've got to be brutally honest about. You can't have no skeletons in the cupboard. You've got to say how it is. And that's the way I say bad things can be.
And I think,
like you said,
go on, sorry.
Sugarcoat nothing no more. And for too long, we've been putting sticky ply. For too long, whatever issue it is, which is on open wounds, we never go that bit further to actually find a solution. It's just quick fixes all the time.
It is, and I think, you know, again, that was really where I sort of struggled with in that immediate aftermath of actually coming to terms with the fact that too often for government there's two options. They either say the right things or they throw money at a problem, and they expect that either or both is going to fix it. I mean, how many times, guys, you'll be aware of this, but after every attack we hear the whole enough is enough or lessons will be learned. There are no worse. I mean, perhaps the only one worse phrase that I think really irks a lot of the survivors is thoughts and prayers, because what does that even mean? But, you know, the whole lessons will be learned thing, after every attack, enough is enough after every attack. And then all we see is either nothing happens or the government announces, you know, a new fund that charities can apply for, and that's that. And don't get me wrong, that should be part of an overall strategy. But that can't be enough to just sort of take that hands-off approach and say, right, you know what I mean, these charities will deal with it and work. Because, you know, there are people on the ground, in the police, in Prevent, whatever sort of spheres you want to talk about, even in communities at ground level, that are working their asses off in these issues. You know, they're actually doing their bit, in many ways, without the same inspiration to do that as I do, you know, and I think kudos to them. But it needs, at that highest level, it needs a bit of political responsibility, and it needs this acceptance that, you know what, it's not going to be an easy issue. It's not going to be particularly an election winner. It's not something that draws people in and wins you votes, but it needs to be addressed. And I think we need that political gravitas really behind it.
There has to be
beyond just writing articles.
Yeah, no, I agree. But the thing is, my brother, politics and the people in political power and position of change, there has to be a sense of genuine help and support of the common man and woman. You have to feel for the people that you get votes from. You know, we live in a democracy. In a free democracy and liberal society, where our representatives in the Commons are our representatives.
Mm-hmm.
Problem is once they are, allocated into that position or voted into a position, they forget about their promises.
Mm-hmm.
They forget about the common person. They forget about the towns and cities that they are from. And especially those individuals that are impacted by some of the most horrific attacks on this country. You're right. But for me, they need to stay strong to their own roots. If they are from, like a young man like yourself, you're a northern lad from a northern town, you're working class, you understand? Now, if you became a representative in that particular town or city, and you got the opportunity to take that voice to the Commons,
mm-hmm.
then it becomes an obligation on you to speak for the ones that are victims.
Yeah,
I have a lot of honor, a lot of respect.
Go for it. I don't know where that came from. Go on.
I think that was Ivan. Was that Ivan?
Yeah, it's okay. It's cool. Go for it. You okay? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I mean, I can hear you. Was I? Yep. Is he still with us?
Yeah, you carry on.
Okay. Well, no, I mean, look, I completely agree, and I think part of that realization.
Yeah, video went off on my phone.
Go for it, Travis.
Yeah, I'll go for it again. No, I was just going to say, and I think, for me, it's that sort of feeling that we really, and I think people take it for granted, we really only have one shot, really, to make a difference. And, if you get given an opportunity and by very nature of the position they're in, they have that opportunity, they have that power, you have to use it. It can't just be for career purposes. And I know that's tarring them all with the same brush, and I don't mean to do it in that way, because there are some good eggs in there, in the basket. But it's just a message that I think they all need to take home, really. And I think it's something that, again, when it comes to support for survivors and these sort of people affected by these incidents, we have to remember that it can affect you. Just because you're an MP or a Lord or, a Prime Minister or something, these issues can affect you, and you wouldn't wish it on your worst enemy. So I think, in my mind, whoever is affected by these sort of attacks, regardless of their background, of their involvement, they need to be supported, and they all need to receive equitable support, really. And that's where, for me, if you're in a position to change that, you need to, 100%.
You need to be the servant of the people.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what it is. There's a saying amongst, there's a Persian saying which says, all servants in reality are kings. And someone replied to it, goes, Kullu makhdum aslam khadim shud. That in reality, all kings are servants.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you want to be in a place of leadership, if you want to be honored, if you want to be respected, guess what? You've got to serve the people that will give you the honor. You've got to care for those people that will give you status. And that's the common man and woman. And what a lot of people in power forget is that the same people that have elected you, they could remove you.
Absolutely.
Right? Do the right thing when you're in that position and place. Hope what it is, I think more young men like yourself and women who can come forth, talk, discuss, and give the experience. Hopefully, we can hope. We are people of hope,
Yeah,
right? We can
absolutely.
hope that change can take place. Guys, you are listening to Creating the Conversation podcast. Of course, we've been talking to our young man, Mr. Travis Frain, and it's been an amazing journey with him. He's had some amazing, difficult experiences, but what he's done with it is phenomenal. We are coming. We've got nearly to the end of our session with yourself, Travis, today. Um, we've got about 15 minutes left to the end of our podcast today, and it's been a phenomenal opportunity to talk to you, and to be inspired by you, sir. To be truthfully speaking, to be inspired by you, inspired by what you're saying and what you think, and of course, keeping in mind in the front of our minds the difficulties that you've gone through. They've not gone away. It's not that they've gone away; they haven't. You deal with it on a daily basis. I want to put on a particular picture, and I want you to share with us your thoughts and feelings that you get when you see this.
Well, I mean that's a picture of me with my dog Xena, and that was taken quite recently actually. Last year, I think, start of lockdown, and we're up in the Lake District actually, and you know, a big part of my recovery actually was the physical side of things, and you know, I have to be honest with you, I was never really much of an exercise person before the attack, and I think you take these things for granted. You know, since the attack, I've got quite into my running, ran marathons and all sorts, and you know, in the picture you can see there, we're hiking in the Lake District, and it really puts things in perspective, I think. And this is probably a convoluted answer to your question, but for me, that sort of shows how shows the simple things really, and shows how you got to take, you know, the simple pleasures where you can find them, and make the most of what you've got, whatever you've got.
And what you've got and what you've created is phenomenal, Travis. And I think a young man like yourself, amongst us, who speaks in the manner that you do and who has this amazing story to tell, with the whole pain and everything within it, but does it so well. You know, we're talking about politics and we're talking about creating change. Maybe that's an avenue that you can also walk down and be the change that you desire. Do you
Who
understand?
knows? Yeah, I mean, look,
Yeah.
at the end of the
I'll
day,
walk for you, mate. I'll walk for you. You got my walk, mate. You know what I'm saying?
I just wanna do my bit, to be honest, and that's the way I see it. I mean, there was a lot that went wrong with you know, what happened to us, and not just the incident, but in the aftermath. And I think, you know, we all have to have a purpose, really. And I think whether I like it or not, this is going to be mine now. And I think just finding a way, you know, again, going back to that positive outlet, really, to just do my bit in the same way that you guys are. And we're all part of a very big, I guess, a cog in the machine, and we're all just doing our bit, really.
We are, and that's the intention, isn't it? Ultimately, the idea is a conversation at a time. And see, like I said, I work in a particular area, right? And at the moment, because of the whole incident that happened in America with George Floyd, and of course, the race and ethnicity and diversity issues becoming a very essential, important part of discussion and conversation in our communities. And one of the things I've come across, and again I'm coming across, is that the reluctancy to talk, the reluctancy to say it how it is, the reluctancy to listen to the one who's going through pain. And I think until we don't get to that point, even though Travis and Ivan, our community, our British society is based upon that. What is the Commons? What is the Lords? Is people talking.
Mm-hmm.
That's what our law is based upon. It's about voting for a particular idea, concept, philosophy, you know, whatever law it may be. We pass it through the Commons. We pass it through a process by talking and discussing and debating about it, which is supposed to be normal for us. It's supposed to be normal.
Absolutely.
And change occurs by talking and discussing. Like I said, we are nearly at the end of our discussion conversation. I'm going to give you a few minutes in a few moments. First, I'm going to go to Ivan, my man. I just want you to think about something that you feel that you can share with people who will also listen to this later on as well. They will benefit from your words and your statements. If there's other work that you are doing, Travis, please
Mhm.
share that with us. I want people to follow you. I want people to engage with you and learn within your journey. I think the journey that you're going to have in your life, that we will also be inspired by that. So, Ivan, my man, any words of reflection and thought from you, sir?
Let me think now. It's been so while since we've done from today is not to use any kind of event like this for your own agenda. Really, I hope that Travis has taught you or made you understand that the ripple effects of it's always bigger than the event, and maybe just take some time before just to think about the families and just maybe keep moral compass again. Just make sure that's working.
Travis, coming to you, sir. Your reflection, your thoughts for today.
Sure. Well, look, I mean, all I can say for a start is just, a massive thank you for inviting me on the show, and letting me babble on for about an hour and a half. But my reflections from it really are just that, I'm always open. I think that's been one sort of real reflection from this entire event for me is just to have those conversations. I mean, I've always been a pretty, I guess, down to earth sort of chatty person anyway, but I am, you've put my Twitter there. I'm always open to talking with like-minded individuals, whether that be people affected by terrorism, or people working in this area. And I think just get in touch, because this has to be a collaborative effort. No one person can do this alone. Lord knows, it's already taking a toll. It's already very tiring work, and you guys will know this as well. So for me, it's just about making sure we support each other, really, and we're all working towards the same goal, and it has to be worthwhile at the end of the day. Even if for me anyway, I think even if we only stop one person from falling down that sort of path, really, it has to be worthwhile, because that one person can cause a ripple effect that you've mentioned across communities, across families, and really just it's about incentivizing that, I think.
It truly is. And Travis, I think you're right in the sense that keep at it, working at it at the same time, but also looking at your own well-being, because this is something I do talk to Ivan about a lot, and the nature of work we generally tend to do. We forget about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
We forget about number one, because you guys are so ingrained in and so motivated in supporting and helping other human beings. Um, Naturally, if one cannot help themselves, it makes it difficult to help anybody else,
Mm-hmm.
right? You also need to help yourself. That means, of course, yourself as person, as individual, but also your families. I'm a man of faith. I pray for your families, I pray for your communities, pray for you. All right, that God gives you strength in these great testing times, right? And I think voices like you, statements, people, the statements that you make are very, very profound and impactful. Please, 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 I beg you, don't stop sharing your experiences. Guys, you've been listening to Creating the Conversation podcast. Yeah, oh my lord, it's been some time, guys. We got together and have a conversation. Hopefully, I'm going to say it now, Travis. Hopefully, please, you'll give us an opportunity to speak to you again in the very near future.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, and we want to talk more about other aspects and elements of your work and experience, and even something else that you want to bring to the platform. We are very, very open to conversation, discussion, and especially someone who has a very fresh look at how the world works, right, and how we can create that change. Guys, you were listening to Create the Conversation podcast with our awesome guest, Mr. Travis Frain. Big up to all of you. We're going to see you next week, and keep it fresh and stay safe. Signing out, Creating the Conversation podcast.